...2024 has been an amazing year for Dragon Ball figure releases, and if you haven't already, please go check out my video for the top 10 figures of 2024. But as we all know, life isn't always about the hits. Sometimes there are misses, and boy, this year had its fair share of misses. Looking at the failures of any craft is important. It helps us recognize what works and what doesn't. And of course, in this hobby, learning this stuff might save you from spending your hard-earned cash on something you might regret. So today, let's dive into the darker side of 2024 with my top 10 worst Dragon Ball figures of 2024. Kicking off our list at number 10 is Perfect Cell from Solid Edge Works. Now, this is the only Crane figure on the list, and it's not terrible, but it is disappointing. Solid Edge Works has been making a big comeback recently, but this figure feels like a relic of their weaker days. Let's start with the face. It's squished and completely disproportionate to the rest of his head. It's almost like someone compressed his entire face inward, and the result is just awkward. But that's not all. The foot support on this figure is frustrating. It doesn't fit snugly, which makes Cell feel unstable, especially with his walking pose. And on top of that, the support is this gross, piss yellow color that clashes with the rest of the figure. You can't even ignore it because it's so distracting. To make matters worse, Cell doesn't scale well at all with the rest of the line. He feels out of place next to the other Solid Edge Works figures. I have high hopes for Solid Edge Works, especially with talents like Varuk and Joe working on their newer figures. But this Cell, let's leave it behind in 2024. Coming in at number 9 is our first Ichiban Kuji entry, Son Goku and Bulma from the Dragon History set. Now, I don't hate this figure, it's not horrible, but it is just strange. Let's start with Goku's face. It's somewhat accurate to the manga, but it still looks off. There's something about the expression or the proportions that feel awkward. Bulma's face is better, but even hers isn't completely accurate to the manga panel that it's based on. The bigger issue is the lack of shading and detail. This is an Ichiban Kuji release, and it's supposed to be premium, but there's barely any shading here. It's just flat, which makes the figure look cheap. Speaking of cheap, the base is hollow and feels like an afterthought. Sure, it's detailed, but the execution doesn't match the supposed quality of a Last One prize. This figure isn't the worst of the year, but it's a massive missed opportunity. The Dragon History set had some solid releases, but this one didn't live up to its potential. At number 8, we have Chi-Chi from the Fierce Battle at the Tenkaichi Budokai set. Fans had been asking for more female representation in the Masterlies line, and when Chi-Chi was announced, there was a lot of excitement. Unfortunately, her release didn't quite live up to the hype. To be fair, her shading, scaling, and overall sculpt are solid. But here's the thing. I hold Masterlies figures to a much higher standard. When they fail, it stings even more. Chi-Chi's hair sculpt, while accurate, has a noticeable horizontal line running across it. It's not super noticeable, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. The bigger issue though is her face. From the intended angle, it looks okay, but from other angles, it lacks detail. Her eyes are painted on rather than sculpted, and there's no depth around her cheeks or mouth, making it look flat and unfinished. Chi-Chi isn't my favorite character, but she plays an important role in Dragon Ball. She deserved a figure that reflects her strength and character. Hopefully, her upcoming kid version will redeem this release in the 2025 rankings. At number 7, we have Majin Buu or Buhan from the Dragon Ball vs. Omnibus Ultimate set. This figure was highly anticipated. Fans have been clamoring for more Buu figures, especially in the Masterlies line. Unfortunately, this release didn't meet expectations. The feet supports are awkward, and the removable support doesn't fit snugly. His face, while decent, doesn't quite capture his manga or anime look, and there are sloppy applications around his mouth and eyes. The paint and shading are lackluster compared to previous Majin Buu figures too. His shirt has a glossy finish instead of the matte look that fans prefer, and the shading is far too subtle. They should have taken cues from the Super Buu in the Omnibus Beast set. The most glaring issue is the seam on his head tentacle. It looks like it's hastily glued on, making it appear more like a hat than an organic part of his body. This lack of attention to detail is disappointing for such a desired figure. Next up at number 6 is Super Vegito, another letdown from the same Kuji set. Vegito doesn't get as many figures as Gogeta, and fans were excited to see his Dragon Ball Z iteration. Sadly, this figure just didn't deliver. The reference for the figure capturing his transformation into Super Saiyan is great. The shading on his gi is also impressive, and he has a commanding presence. But his face is the major problem here. The mouth is poorly sculpted, the teeth are uneven, and the eyes look off. If the face is wrong, it can ruin the entire figure, and that's what happened here. There are also issues with sculpting on the back of his hair and a noticeable seam line running down it. Despite some positives, this Vegito figure didn't meet the high expectations set by previous Masterlies releases. Coming in at number 5 is the Son Goku and Son Gohan duo from the Omnibus Amazing set. Initially, I defended this figure, hoping it would look better in person. Unfortunately, it didn't. The paint quality is subpar, and the shirt has an unwanted shine. The figure is also too tall, making Raditz look short by comparison. But the real issue here is their faces. Goku's eyes have an empty look, and the hair sculpt lacks finesse, giving it a plasticky appearance. His mouth, missing teeth for accuracy, looks odd due to its strange shape. Gohan fares much worse. His eyes are too small and spaced way too far apart, giving him an alien-like appearance. This figure feels unnecessary, especially when better options, like the warriors who defend the Earth figures, already exist. At number 4, we return to Goku and Bulma, but this time from the Fantastic Adventure set. Fans were initially skeptical when Bandai announced non-Masterlies Kuji sets after several years of only Masterlies releases. I approached it with optimism, but this figure was a letdown. Many versions had a strange residue on the bike's window, which was off-putting. The figure is small, and shading is only really noticeable on the bike's wheels. The base attempts to replicate manga speed lines, but ends up looking unattractive and distracting. This figure had so much potential, but it just didn't land. The overall execution feels lackluster, and I'm even considering removing it from my collection to free up space. If you're looking for a Goku and Bulma on a bike, the SH Figure Arts version is a much better option. At number 3, we have Shenron from the Dragon Ball Daima Ichiban Kuji. Now, this entry has to be shocking because it's rare to see any of Bandai's Dragon figures make a worst list. Historically, Shenron figures have been considered highlights of Ichiban Kuji sets, majestic, detailed, and often considered holy grails for collectors. But this Shenron, it's a major step backward. Right off the bat, everyone was skeptical when this figure was announced. Why? Because it's essentially a recycled mold of the previous 2 Ichiban Kuji Shenron figures. The only difference, this one has a metallic paint job. Look, I'm usually not a fan of metallic finishes on figures, especially on last one prizes. It often makes them look cheaper, like they've been dipped in spray paint or something. That said, I didn't mind the metallic finish here as much as I thought I would. But can I agree that a matte finish like the previous 2 Shenron figures would have been better? Absolutely. At the very least, the metallic paint gives this Shenron a distinct look compared to the earlier versions. But aside from that, it's hard to find any redeeming qualities. The real issues start to show when you get into the finer details. As a Dragon figure, one of the most highly sought after types of figures in the Dragon Ball collecting community, Shenron should feel grand and impressive. Instead, he feels like a cheap cash grab. The likeness is slightly off, mainly due to the poor paint application. This is especially noticeable around his eyes, where the blacks and reds are uneven. His expression also suffers because of this. His slack jaw makes him look lifeless and awkward. And the worst part? This isn't just a flaw on my figure. It's a universal issue across the entire production run. How does that even happen? For a figure that should be a centerpiece in any collection, this Shenron misses the mark entirely. Its only saving grace is that it's the first Ichibancho Shenron that's widely available outside of Japan. For collectors who missed out on the first two Shenron figures, this could be an affordable alternative. But honestly, I'd recommend saving up and importing the Ultimate Variation Shenron instead. It's a far superior figure and worth the extra cost. Coming in at number 2, we have Bulma from the Fantastic Adventure Ichiban Kuji. And well, I'm not even sure if I could call this a figure. It's technically a figure, but let's be honest, it doesn't feel like one. Let's start with what works. The Bulma bust itself is great. Her expression perfectly captures her appearance from the anime's original outro, and the sculpting on her face and hair is spot on. If it were just the bust, it might have been a solid release. But then we get to the mirror. The mirror is, without a doubt, one of the worst design choices I've ever seen in a Dragon Ball figure. As soon as I removed the protective film, I noticed smudges all over it. So naturally, I tried to clean it, and that's when I discovered noticeable scratches. It's incredibly frustrating. You can't even display this piece without constantly worrying about it looking dirty or damaged. On top of that, the material feels cheap. While the Dragon Ball logo at the base is a nice touch, it doesn't make up for the fact that this figure is more of an eyesore than a centerpiece. It doesn't fit in with most collections, and I doubt many collectors actually want it. I know that if I tried to sell mine, it wouldn't get many offers, especially with the damage to the mirror. At this point, the figure has been banished to our bathroom, and honestly, that's where it belongs. Finally, we've reached number 1, the absolute worst Dragon Ball figure of 2024. And that title goes to the last one prize, Son Goku from the Fantastic Adventure Ichiban Kuji. Where do I even begin? This figure is a huge disappointment on so many levels. The quality is incredibly cheap, which is shocking for a last one prize. Typically, these figures are supposed to be the crown jewels of their sets, something to aspire to collect. But with this Goku, the most premium parts are the base and maybe the umbrella, and even those feel subpar. The entire set feels rushed, like it was pushed out the door without proper quality checks. Goku's likeness is fairly accurate to Toriyama's illustration, which is a small positive. But even then, something about it still looks off. His hair is pieced together in a way that lacks detail and thought. It almost looks like an afterthought rather than a carefully crafted element. The shading on this figure is minimal, mostly appearing on his boots. For a last one prize, this lack of detail is totally unacceptable. And then there's the size. I understand that Kid Goku figures are meant to be smaller, but this one is ridiculously tiny. It feels more like a small trinket than a figure worthy of a collection. The biggest issue though was personal. My figure arrives without the bird on Goku's tail, a crucial part of the design. I couldn't believe it. How does Bandai let something like this slip through? Missing pieces on a premium item sold at $45 MSRP is inexcusable. While I know this was an isolated incident, it should have never happened in the first place. Unfortunately, without the bird, I can't even sell this figure. It's been a nightmare trying to get rid of it, and it feels more like a curse than a collectible. This entire set marked the worst experience I've ever had with Ichiban Kuji, and I hope it's a lesson learned for future releases. Thanks for watching today's video. I know this video was more on the negative side, but even bad figures have something to teach us. They help us appreciate the artistry and detail in other figures and refine our collections. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you had similar experiences, or is there a figure you'd like to add to this list? Remember, collecting is all about finding what you love. Until the next video, take care, and I'll see you all later. And of course, in this hobby, yeah.
Spin around and do that.